Help give kids an extra life by donating today to help sick and injured children. Link in the description and pinned comment below.
I have provided this for your fateful review. Be sure not to miss anything. You do want a game clear, don't you? Signed, SDK.
Galaxian.
Well, I don't know who this SDK person thinks he is, but if it's a review he wants, it's a review he's gonna get.
When I first started QG at the arcade back in February of 2019, I covered Pac-Man, one of the most iconic arcade games of all time. This was back before the series even had a proper name.
It's only one of a laundry list of games that Namco made famous. I'll get to several of them in due time.
Well, goes to show how bad my planning skills are. Yeah, remind me to stick to what I say, because I'm only getting to another Namco series exactly 2 1/3 years later. And it's a series that's almost as important to Namco as Pac-Man himself. That, my friends, is Galaxian. One of the pioneering games of both Namco and the space shooter genre, Galaxian is one of the icons of the golden age of the arcades, both on its own and as the basis for an entire series. A series that went in directions both expected and unexpected. So today, we're digging back into Namco's archives and taking a look at one of the quintessential space shooters of the arcade. There's quite a bit to cover, including how the original came to be, what made it so special, and the legacy it left behind, as well as some stuff that most people might not even know about. There's a reason that the icon from this game is best buds with Pac-Man.
This game's not gonna clear itself, so I better get started right now. Without any further delays or interruptions of any kind, I give you the Galaxian series.
The year was 1978, and Taito had taken the arcade scene by storm with Space Invaders, a game that helped legitimize video games as a profitable business. Understandably, other amusement companies took notice, particularly Namco. The company's president at the time, Masaya Nakamura, handed down a missive to designer Kazunori Sawano, who had worked on some of the company's electromechanical games such as 1977's Shoot-Away, to make the best post-Invaders game he could. Sawano actually had several ideas in mind half a year prior to the game starting production. Which is good because the game's production only took 6 months. Not surprisingly, the team opted for a simple is best philosophy in designing the game, hoping to make a game that anyone could play. Now aside from Space Invaders itself, the game also took inspiration from, of all things, Star Wars. Why do I hear the Imperial March playing? So anyway, Sawano was especially taken with the large-scale space battles of Star Wars, and wanted to recreate that feeling, especially in the sound effects. In fact, early in development, he envisioned the enemies looking like TIE fighters, but that probably would have gotten him sued. What we ultimately got was an important step up for games at the time. One of the first games to utilize RGB colors instead of monochrome, and the first game to use tile-based hardware to create animated sprites and scrolling, although the latter was used exclusively for the background. Galaxian first released in Japan in September of 1979 and was a huge hit, after which Namco approached Midway Manufacturing to make a deal to distribute the game overseas. Midway had recently lost their partnership with Taito after the success of, what else, Space Invaders, and were looking for a new partner. The deal was inked and the game hit America in February of 1980. Again, it was a big success. So let's take a look at what made it work. So when I say that Sawano and his team went with a simple is best philosophy, this is the sort of thing I mean. Unlike Space Invaders, however, where the enemies descend towards you in an unrelenting march toward the inevitable, the enemies in Galaxian generally remain in formation, taking turns to swoop down and engage you while shooting. Now, due to the current limitations at the time, you could only fire one shot at a time, and you had to wait until it left the screen before you could fire another shot. This meant that each shot was important, as a whiff could leave you momentarily open to an enemy attack. Enemies actually give you more points if you destroy them while they're in flight as opposed to when they're in formation, as shown by the score table in the attract mode. At the top of the formation were the two flagships, which serve as the icon for the game. When they swoop down, they're usually accompanied by a couple of alien escorts. If you blast the escorts first, followed by the flagship, you get an extra bonus. The enemies become more aggressive as you clear more waves, dive bombing you more often and firing more shots as they attack you. This was done gradually, as Sawano really didn't want the difficulty to spike. However, he did want the difficulty to become more noticeable as the wave count got higher and higher. He actually designed for the enemies to have personalities of their own, planning their attacks based on the player's behavior. With its simplicity and fair challenge, as well as its solid graphic and sound design, Galaxian was a critical and financial success for Namco, and it became the company's first big hit. While it didn't achieve the same numbers as games like Space Invaders and Pac-Man, it managed to carve out a place in gaming as an important step in the evolution of space shooters, seeing success as late as 1983, an impressive lifespan for an early arcade game. With the game's success, Namco produced a large number of Galaxian arcade boards. By the early 80s, however, they were becoming harder to sell. To help clear out stock, designer Shigeru Yokoyama was asked by the higher-ups to make two new games for the board. The first was King and Balloon, a non-space shooter credited as the first game to use synthesized speech.
Thank you!
While the second game was originally planned to use the Galaxian board, Namco's R&D division suggested that Yokoyama shift development to a new board. The board and the new game would be given the same name, Galaga. The initial planning for the game took around 2 months, and while Yokoyama wasn't specifically asked to make a shooting game, management expressed their desire for a game that was similar to Galaxian. In other words, a sequel. During the game's development, prior to location testing, the team took some time to focus on the instruction card. Numerous designs for the card were submitted and rejected, until Nakamura said, "Screw it, make it in front of me and we'll come up with something that works." Another thing that worked was Namco's corporate structure at the time, since it was laid back enough to allow the team to set their own deadlines. During the game's development, there was plenty of constructive feedback given by many employees, including Nakamura and Mr. Pac-Man himself, Toru Iwatani. As a result of the game's exposure around the office, the game was a hit with the staff. Location tests, however, were another story. The problem was that the loc test version of the game was too easy, meaning players could play a long time on one credit. And for an industry that fed on coins, that was an issue that would need to be addressed. Thus, the game was made harder at the behest of top execs. The game was ultimately released in Japan in September of 1981, with US distribution once again being handled by Midway in October. And being a sequel, Galaga was quite a step up. First off, you could have 2 shots on screen at once as opposed to 1. This gave you a bit more leeway in fighting off the attacking aliens. Speaking of the aliens, now they flew into formation in groups at the start of each level instead of just appearing out of nowhere. In the first level or 2, they won't bother you until they're in formation, but later on they will shoot back, so be careful. Also, starting from the 4th stage, some enemies will break into multiple enemies when they engage you, offering bonus points for downing them all. 2 other, more significant additions to the game have a bit of history behind them. First is the boss Galaga at the top of the formation. First off, these take 2 hits to kill, and doing so momentarily stops the other enemies from attacking. Secondly, they're capable of capturing your ship by using their infamous tractor beam. This behavior may also be familiar to casual Smash players, particularly in Smash 4 and Ultimate. According to Yokoyama, this was inspired by a similar scene he saw in a space movie once, which gave him an idea for enemies that attack in different ways. But this can also give you another way to attack. If you manage to then destroy that same boss Galaga while it's in flight with your captured ship, you'll release the ship and gain the use of the famous Dual Fighter for double the attack power. This increases your firepower dramatically and is the key to high scores. The other is that the 3rd stage and every 4 thereafter is a bonus or challenging stage. During these stages, a total of 40 enemies will fly in predetermined patterns, giving you a short time to fire at them. Down all 40 and boom, 10,000 point bonus. This actually came about as the result of a bug. During development, lead programmer Tetsu Ogawa told Yokoyama that there was a bug where certain groups of enemies would leave the screen instead of joining the formation. It actually gave Ogawa the idea to incorporate the idea into the game as the challenging stages. This level of evolution made Galaga even more famous than Galaxian over the years, and it's featured in nearly every Namco Museum compilation. It's heralded as one of the quintessential games of the golden age of arcades for its colorful graphics and challenging gameplay. And this is where the average person's knowledge of the series probably begins and ends. Considering how few people actually talk about the third game in the series, Gaplus, it feels like the forgotten child of the series. Released in 1984, Gaplus is one of only 2 games to use Namco's Phozon arcade board. The board was named after the only other game to use it. Some people may know it under another name, Galaga 3. Namco actually distributed an upgrade kit to North American patrons to change the name, including a new marquee, given that they thought that name recognition was the reason for the game not doing so well in America. Never mind that the region was in the midst of the great video game crash. Honestly, it's a shame that Gaplus isn't given more attention because the game evolves the formula of its predecessors even further. First off, your ship has full 8-way movement up to the midpoint of the screen. This increases your options for mobility and also helps compensate for more complex and tricky enemy movements. The next change is the evolution of the dual fighter from Galaga. After the enemies are all in formation in each stage, referred to as parsecs in the game, I wonder how many it would take for this fighter to make the Kessel Run, the Queen appears at the top carrying a blaster head. You only have 2 chances to defeat the Queen in flight to claim the blaster head, but it's worth it. The first one gives you a tractor beam that lets you capture enemies to increase your firepower dramatically. See, we have the power now! Others provide perks including permanently giving you a powered-up ship, holding enemies in place to blast them for mega points, and other abilities. You can also gain ship parts for extra lives, which can also be gained by picking up special flags that appear under certain conditions. There are even harder stages with tougher waves of enemies that begin by scrolling backwards with ominous music. One of the most interesting changes came with the challenging stages. This time you have to juggle enemies in order to complete words and earn bonuses. It's an interesting test of your coordination. Despite all these improvements and progressions, Gaplus didn't achieve the success that its predecessors did, and as a result, Namco hasn't given it the same attention that it gives Galaxian and Galaga. And it's a shame too, because it's a really great game. Thankfully, the recent Namco Museum Archives does include an NES-style demake in the package, so that's probably your best chance to try it right now outside of emulation. Next up, we come to the 4th game in the series, Galaga 88, released in, well, 1988. Okay, the Japanese release happened in December of 1987, but it's close enough, damn it! I don't care how the Game Awards does things. This game was made on the Namco System 1 arcade board, which also hosted games such as Pac-Mania and Splatterhouse. Considering that it directly carries the Galaga name, it has more in common with Galaga than with Gaplus, starting with locking you at the bottom of the screen again. Come on, Namco, I was getting used to the free movement. We also have some new aliens to deal with, including exploding ones, and new challenging stages which are more musically themed. They're literally called That's Galactic Dancin', which was an idea hatched by soundtrack composer Hiroyuki Kawada. Another change expands on the dual ship from Galaga. The bosses can now capture dual ships, which is a huge no, but if you can free the captured dual ship, it upgrades into the ridiculous triple ship, which is a gigantic yes! Perhaps the most interesting thing in this game, however, was level progression. Some stages had meteors which you could destroy, some of which contained these blue capsules. Collect 2 of them, and you could blast a wormhole into another dimension where the enemies evolve and become tougher. Some stages are even more like vertically scrolling stages than the typical Galaga Formation stage. The Game Over screen even shows your progress through the different dimensions, which is pretty cool if I do say so myself. I noticed something interesting about that screen. Yeah, this was released in the time when even arcade games had started to have concrete endings. There were 4 possible final bosses in the game, with a different ending attached to each one. I guess by this point people had figured out how to squeeze maximum playtime out of one coin, and that just isn't good for business. Well, Galaga 88 was successful in Japan, but in the US, where it was published by Atari, it was another story. The thing sold less than 1,000 units by the end of the year. Well, at least there are plenty of compilations which have the game if you're so interested in trying it. And that should be all for... Oh, that's right, I almost forgot that one. Yup, in 1995, around the time that the first Namco Museum compilation was released in Japan on the PS1, Namco also released an arcade collection called Namco Classic Collection Volume 1. This arcade machine, developed on Namco's ND1 arcade board, included Galaga, Xevious, and Mappy, as well as new updated versions called the Arrangement games. These games included updates to the gameplay, more advanced graphics, and new soundtracks that were meant to immerse players into the game's atmosphere. Galaga Arrangement in particular had a few significant changes when compared to the original. First and foremost was the addition of co-op. The original was one of those games where two-player meant handing off the controls when someone lost a life. In Arrangement, however, you were playing together with player 2, so you could clear the game with super co-op play. Second was that, similar to Galaga 88, there were more different formations and different ways that enemies flew into formation across the game's 30 levels. In fact, the waves of enemies were probably more dynamic than ever. Hell, there were even new boss Galagas, which leads to the third major change in this game, specifically to the power-up system. Instead of just getting the dual fighter when rescuing a captured ship, the power-up you got depended on which type of boss Galaga captured the ship in the first place. The standard green gave you a wide shot, which is most similar to the dual fighter, the yellow boss gave you a rapid-fire shot which allowed up to 4 shots on screen, and the red one gave you a 3-way shot with ricochet bullets. Now that's what I call a power-up. The levels are grouped into zones with new backgrounds for each one, leading up to the enemy hive where King Gallaspark awaits. Yeah, the end boss has a name this time. Honestly, this feels like more of a side grade to Galaga 88 than an upgrade. Still, I would say it's worth playing if you can find a compilation that has it.
Well, that should fulfill the game clear conditions. Huh? Overlooked something? What else is there? Let me have a look. Whoa, they did that?
That's right, game enthusiasts, this isn't over just yet. Remember when I said that this series went in directions both expected and unexpected? This is the unexpected side of things. Galaxian 3, Project Dragoon, and its follow-up, Galaxian 3, Attack of the Zolgear. These games were the latest in Namco's experiment with games that felt more like amusement park attractions, including motion-based games like Metal Hawk and Winning Run. Project Dragoon was developed by engineer Shigeki Toyama, who was tasked with making the biggest game possible so that no one else could copy it. Originally shown off at the International Garden and Greenery Expo in Japan in 1990, the original unit was capable of a maximum of 28 players, which was huge for the time. It was played in a large circular room with a hydraulic moving unit in the center, which admittedly gave the operators problems. Later iterations for theme parks scaled down the size to 16 players, and eventually down to 6 for more general arcades. In 1990, the original machine was moved to Namco's Wonder Eggs theme park, where it remained until the park's closure in 2000. The game itself was a fixed rail shooter, with the background being run on 2 simultaneous laser discs, while 3D polygon enemies were generated on top of it. The players would take control of the ship's cannons to blast enemies and obstacles to make it to the end of the scenario. They would share a single health bar, meaning everyone had to pull their weight or everyone got screwed. Of course, while the experience would definitely be pretty intense, it looks like it would pretty much be a one-and-done thing. There would be a follow-up in 1994 called Attack of the Zolgear, but the only real difference is the story being played. Of course, if you want to actually play the thing, good luck. Nearly all of the Theater 6 cabinets were dismantled when they fell out of use. They were too expensive to maintain. Nearly all of the remaining machines are in the hands of private collectors. There is a port of Galaxian 3 on PS1, but only in Japan and Europe. However, the game maintains quite a cult following, and more importantly, an attempt to make a single-player prototype led to the development of Starblade, which went on to inspire such titles as Star Fox and Panzer Dragoon. Wow, makes me actually want to try it out myself.
And with that... Well, that was quite a ride through arcade history. But one question. Who the hell was SDK? Wait a minute. SDK? Shindan Kuroto! I should have frickin' known.
Well, that takes us to the end of this long overdue retrospective. As we've seen, some great things have started out with the simplest ideas, but give them time and nurture them well, and they will yield some glorious fruits. And not only is Galaxian one of the most iconic arcade games in the world on its own, but its legacy has left an impact on gaming with some beloved cult classics and more. It was simple, addictive, and ambitious. Without a doubt, it was the next step up from Space Invaders and the next step up for shmups. It deserves its place as a landmark in gaming and a seat of distinction in Namco's expansive honor roll. And to think it took so long after Pac-Man for me to finally dive back into said honor roll. The kings of the arcades deserve better from me, not gonna lie. I'll be sure not to wait too long for the next Namco game I cover. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed. The last Metroid is in captivity, they said. The galaxy is at peace, they said. Okay, so why do those Galactic Federation assholes keep experimenting with making more of them? Those things are dangerous even in the right hands. Yeah, they're the ex-parasite's only weakness and all that, but that doesn't mean some evil organization like, say, the Space Pirates wouldn't use them for themselves. Next time, Top 10 Metroid Power-Ups. It's game time! Hey everyone, QG here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check out my Twitter and my Twitch streams, and consider supporting me through Patreon, and donating to my Extra Life campaign to support Children's Wisconsin. Thanks for watching.